In every corner of the modern world, behind quiet faces and tired eyes, something invisible is happening. It starts as a small thought, almost harmless, just a whisper in the mind. But slowly it stretches, grows, twists itself into something larger, heavier, sharper. And before a person even realizes it, the mind is no longer a calm river. It becomes a storm. This storm has a name: overthinking, a psychological loop powerful enough to change emotions, decisions, and even a person's entire life. Most people never talk about it, yet almost everyone has felt it. The endless replaying of conversations, the constant questioning of decisions, the fear of what might happen, and the quiet torture of imagining things that never will. Scientists call it cognitive rumination, but people know it as lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, unable to stop the mind from running. Overthinking didn't appear out of nowhere. Human brains evolved to survive danger, not modern life. Thousands of years ago, the mind's job was simple: scan for threats, predict risks, avoid danger. The ancestors who overthought survived longer than the ones who didn't think enough. But today, there are no lions in the dark, no predators hiding behind trees. Yet the brain still behaves like danger is everywhere. Instead of physical threats, it reacts to emotional threats: rejection, embarrassment, uncertainty, failure, the unknown. A single message left on seen, a strange tone in someone's voice, a small mistake at work. These things become triggers. The brain magnifies them as if survival depends on solving them instantly. And that is how overthinking begins. The mind tries to protect, but ends up attacking itself. Deep inside the brain, there is a structure called the amygdala. It is ancient, emotional, and fast, a fire alarm built for survival. When something feels uncertain or threatening, the amygdala activates, releasing stress chemicals that push the mind to analyze and prepare. But in modern life, the threats are abstract. You can't fight them. You can't run from them. So the mind plays the same thoughts over and over, hoping to find a solution. Meanwhile, another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, tries to reason, calm, and solve. But when anxiety rises, the emotional brain overrides the rational one. This creates a loop where the mind tries harder and harder to think its way out, but only sinks deeper. Some people overthink because of childhood environments where mistakes were punished. Others because of trauma, rejection, or unpredictable households. Some developed perfectionism as a shield, believing that if they overanalyze everything, they can avoid pain. For others, it comes from loneliness, heartbreak, or simply living in a world that moves too fast. Overthinking is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of a brain that learned to survive by being hyper-alert, a brain that cared too much for too long. And yet, overthinking has a quiet cruelty. It makes small problems feel catastrophic and simple choices feel dangerous. It creates imaginary scenarios more painful than reality itself. It steals sleep, joy, and peace. It convinces a person that something is wrong even when everything is fine. It exaggerates flaws, doubts relationships, questions abilities, and replays failures with perfect clarity. And often, the person suffering from it appears calm on the outside, while inside their mind is a battlefield no one else can see. Scientists have found that overthinking changes the brain's chemistry. Stress hormones rise, heart rate increases, muscles tense. The brain begins linking neutral situations with fear, creating a cycle. The more someone overthinks, the more the brain wires itself to overthink again. It becomes a habit, reinforced each time the mind spirals. This is why people feel stuck, even when they logically know their thoughts are irrational. The brain is practicing the same mental pathway again and again until it becomes automatic. But overthinking doesn't only ruin the present, it steals the future. Studies show that people who overthink make slower decisions, take fewer risks, miss opportunities, and experience more regret. Not because they are incapable, but because their mind traps them in analysis until the moment passes. And in relationships, overthinking creates misunderstandings, fear, insecurity. The person doesn't want to push people away. They simply can't silence the fear that they might lose them. Yet despite all of this, overthinking is not permanent. The brain is adaptable. What it has learned, it can unlearn. What it has wired, it can rewire. But before change can happen, a person must understand what is really happening inside their mind and why it reacts the way it does. Because once someone sees the mechanism, the storm becomes less mysterious. And for the first time, they realize they are not broken. They are simply human. The strange thing about overthinking is that it often disguises itself as intelligence. People who overthink are usually observant, sensitive, highly aware of details others overlook. Their brains process information deeply, connect patterns quickly, and imagine countless possibilities. This is a gift, but without control, the same gift becomes a burden. Analyzing becomes worrying. Awareness becomes fear. Sensitivity becomes exhaustion. Intelligent minds often suffer the most because they can imagine the worst outcomes with incredible clarity. They can create entire stories from a single sentence, a single glance, a single moment that didn't feel right. What others forget in minutes, they remember for years. Psychologists call this anticipatory anxiety, the fear of what might happen. It is the brain's attempt to prevent emotional pain before it occurs. But anticipation often becomes punishment. When the mind tries too hard to avoid hurt, it ends up hurting the person more than reality ever could. This is why many overthinkers feel tired even on calm days. They are fighting battles that exist only in their imagination, rehearsing disasters that never come. Their mind is always preparing, always protecting, always alert. And then there is retrospective rumination, the act of replaying past events. A conversation from 3 years ago, a mistake no one remembers, a laugh that sounded wrong, a message they should have sent differently. These memories return at night, not because the person wants them, but because the brain is trying to fix something that cannot be fixed. The past is over, but the mind treats it as if it is still happening. This is why overthinking feels like drowning. Past and future mixed together until the present moment disappears. In relationships, overthinking becomes even more powerful. A pause in someone's reply becomes a sign of rejection. A neutral expression becomes a silent judgment. A small argument becomes proof of failure. Overthinkers often love deeply, but that deep love comes with deep fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough, fear of losing something they value. The irony is that overthinking often appears like distrust, but in reality, it is excessive care. A heart scared of being broken again, a mind trying to protect what matters. And yet, people rarely see the intention. They only see the worry. Scientists have identified a loop within the brain called the default mode network, a set of interconnected regions that activate when the mind is not focused on an external task. This network is responsible for daydreaming, imagination, and self-reflection. But in overthinkers, this network becomes overactive. Instead of quiet resting, the brain becomes a generator of what-ifs, maybes, and possible threats. It is the psychological equivalent of an engine running non-stop, even when the car is parked. But beneath all of this lies something even more important: the stories people tell themselves. Every overthinker carries a story, usually rooted in childhood or past experiences. Stories like, "I'm not good enough," "I always mess things up," "People leave when they see who I really am," or "I must be perfect to be loved." These stories operate like silent programs, shaping how a person interprets reality. The moment something uncertain happens, the mind doesn't see the situation, it sees the story. A delayed message becomes proof that they aren't important. A mistake becomes proof they aren't capable. A disagreement becomes proof they aren't lovable. The story becomes a lens through which everything is viewed. And this is why two people can face the same situation, but experience completely different emotions. One sees a challenge, the other sees a threat. One sees uncertainty, the other sees danger. Because for some, the world is not simply what it is what their mind learned it to be. Yet the mind can change. The stories can be rewritten. Overthinking may be powerful, but it is not unstoppable. The same brain that creates the storm can also create peace. But peace is not something that simply appears. It is something that must be understood, practiced, and chosen again and again. The journey begins with awareness, not of the thoughts themselves, but of the pattern behind them. When someone finally sees the pattern clearly, they stop thinking, "Why am I like this?" and start thinking, "I understand why my mind does this." And that small shift is the first crack in the prison wall. The human brain is constantly trying to predict the future. This ability helped our ancestors survive dangerous environments. If they sensed movement in the bushes, their minds imagined the worst, a predator ready to attack. That prediction, even if wrong, kept them alive. But modern life has no lions hiding in the grass. Instead, our dangers are emotional, social, and internal. Yet the brain still uses the same survival system. It reacts to uncertainty as if it is a physical threat. And this is where overthinking begins, not as a flaw, but as an ancient survival mechanism functioning in a world that no longer fits its instincts. Functional MRI scans show that when people overthink, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates strongly. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the rational decision-making part, tries to analyze the situation. These two systems push against each other, creating a mental tug-of-war. One part says, "Calm down," while the other whispers, "Something is wrong." The mind becomes split between logic and fear. This inner conflict is one of the reasons overthinking feels painful. It is not just thinking, it is the brain fighting itself. Psychologists call this cognitive conflict, and it drains enormous mental energy. It is why overthinkers feel exhausted even when they have done nothing physically demanding. Their minds have spent hours in battles no one else can see. And because the conflict happens silently, they often blame themselves for it. They think they are weak, dramatic, or broken. But in reality, they are experiencing a neurological overload. Their brain is simply doing too much of what it was designed to do: protect them. Another layer of overthinking comes from uncertainty, intolerance. Humans hate not knowing what will happen. The brain would rather imagine something bad than face the unknown. This is why people often jump to conclusions, assume the worst, or create dramatic scenarios in their minds. The brain prefers a painful certainty over a peaceful uncertainty. The unknown feels like danger, even if nothing dangerous is present. And then there is social evaluation, the fear of how others see us. Our ancient ancestors survived by belonging to a tribe. Rejection meant death. That instinct still lives inside the modern mind. So when people overthink something they said, or worry about what someone thinks of them, it is not insecurity. It is biology. The brain treats social rejection as a serious threat. Studies even show that emotional rejection activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. This is why a single harsh comment can hurt more than a minor injury. The body heals quickly. The mind holds on. For many overthinkers, the real struggle is not the world around them, but the world inside them. A world shaped by memories. Sometimes, a single difficult experience in childhood can create a lifelong pattern. A strict parent, a painful breakup, a humiliating moment in school. These events become emotional imprints. The brain stores them and uses them as filters for the future. When something similar happens, even vaguely, the brain reacts as if the old wound is happening again. The past becomes alive in the present. This is why some people fear failure more than others, fear judgment more, fear uncertainty more. Their minds are trying to protect them from repeating old pain. But here is something powerful. When people understand the origin of their overthinking, they often feel a sense of release. It is not weakness. It is not brokenness. It is the brain trying to survive an old story. And once someone sees that story clearly, the mind begins to loosen its grip. Awareness is not the cure, but it is the beginning of healing. Some psychologists describe overthinking as mental time travel. The mind keeps revisiting the past and pre-living the future instead of inhabiting the present. And the present is the only place where peace exists. The past is filled with memories you cannot change. The future is filled with possibilities you cannot control. But the present moment, your breath, the sound around you, the feeling of being alive, that is the only reality. The overthinking mind escapes the present because it feels unsafe. It clings to the past and future, trying to create certainty where none can exist. And yet, when someone finally learns to stay in the present, even for small moments, something remarkable happens. The storm quiets. Thoughts lose intensity. The mind stops spinning. This is not magic. It is the brain returning to its natural rhythm. Humans were not meant to think non-stop. They were meant to experience life, not rehearse it endlessly. Slowly, the overthinking mind can be trained to let go, not through force, but through understanding and patience. As people begin to examine the roots of their overthinking, one realization becomes clear. Most worries are not about the present. They are about the fear of losing control. The human mind is terrified of chaos. It wants everything to make sense, to follow a pattern, to stay predictable. When life becomes uncertain, the mind automatically tries to fill the gaps. It creates explanations, scenarios, and warnings. It tries to control the uncontrollable. But control is an illusion. And the harder a person tries to control life through thinking, the more life slips through their fingers. This is why many overthinkers struggle the most at night. When the world is quiet and distractions fade, the mind finally has space to speak. It rushes in, loud and overwhelming. Thoughts that stayed hidden during the day come to the surface. Every regret, every fear, every unfinished conversation returns with double force. The darkness amplifies everything. And because there is no activity to drown the thoughts out, the mind fills the silence with questions that have no answers. What if I fail? Why did I say that? What if something bad happens tomorrow? What if I'm not enough? Nighttime becomes a battlefield between the person and their own thoughts. But overthinking is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and subtle. It shows up as hesitation, indecision, or emotional numbness. Many people don't even realize they are overthinking because the thoughts have become so familiar, they feel normal. They are physically present but mentally distant. They delay choices, avoid risks, and stay stuck not because they lack ambition, but because their mind is constantly calculating every possible outcome. This constant analysis slowly kills spontaneity, creativity, and joy. Life becomes a checklist of potential dangers instead of an experience to be lived. Yet beneath the overthinking lies something remarkably human, the desire to avoid pain. The mind believes that thinking more will protect the heart. It's trying to prepare, to predict, to prevent disappointment. But the truth is that no amount of overthinking can stop life from being uncertain. No amount of planning can guarantee safety, and no amount of worrying can change the outcome of things already destined to happen. Overthinking is a shield made of fear disguised as logic. The irony is that the thoughts people fear the most are often not about events. They are about themselves. What if I'm not capable? What if I'm unlovable? What if I'm the problem? Overthinking is rarely about the world. It is about identity. It is the mind questioning its own worth over and over again. Many overthinkers are perfectionists, not because they want to be perfect, but because they fear what imperfection might reveal. They grew up believing they had to earn love, approval, or safety. So as adults, they try to anticipate every mistake, every flaw, every weakness. They analyze themselves constantly, hoping to avoid rejection. But this self-surveillance becomes a prison. And yet, the same mind capable of creating this prison is also capable of unlocking it. The moment someone stops treating every thought as truth, something shifts. They begin to see thoughts as events in the mind, not reflections of reality. A thought is not a fact. A worry is not a prophecy. A fear is not an identity. Thoughts are electrical signals, nothing more. The brain produces them automatically. Some are helpful, many are not. But none of them are definitions of who a person truly is. Scientific studies show that when people observe their thoughts, instead of reacting to them, the brain's fear circuits weaken. The amygdala becomes less reactive. The prefrontal cortex becomes stronger. Emotional storms pass more quickly. This is why techniques like mindfulness work. They change the brain physically, not just emotionally. The mind learns that it does not have to respond to every thought, worry, or fear. It learns to watch without absorbing. As this shift happens, something profound emerges. Inner space. Moments where the mind stops racing. Moments where silence feels peaceful rather than threatening. Moments where a person feels present, not trapped in the past, not afraid of the future, but grounded in the here and now. It doesn't happen instantly. It happens slowly, through awareness and repetition. But it happens. And in that space, the world looks different. Conversations feel lighter. Mistakes feel survivable. The future feels open instead of dangerous. The mind stops being an enemy and becomes a companion. Overthinking loses its power, not because the thoughts disappear, but because the person no longer believes every story their mind creates. They begin to trust themselves more than their fear. As the mind slowly learns to loosen its grip, a deeper question begins to surface. Why do some people fall into the trap of overthinking, while others move through life with ease? The answer lies in the hidden architecture of the brain, shaped by experiences people often don't remember. The nervous system carries memories not just in thoughts, but in reactions. A raised voice in childhood, a sudden loss, an unpredictable environment. These small moments teach the brain what to expect from the world. If the world felt unsafe, the brain becomes a protector. If love felt conditional, the brain becomes a translator, analyzing every gesture for hidden meaning. If mistakes brought pain, the brain becomes a perfectionist, trying to prevent them at any cost. Overthinking is not a personality trait. It is a survival strategy the brain learned long before the person understood what was happening. This is why telling an overthinker, "Just stop thinking about it," never works. Their mind is not being dramatic. It is trying to keep them alive. It is scanning for danger the way it once saved their ancestors from predators. The difference now is that the danger is emotional rather than physical. But the brain cannot tell the difference. A harsh message can trigger the same fight or flight response as a real threat. A silent room can feel like abandonment. A simple uncertainty can feel like a cliff edge. The body reacts before logic even has time to speak, and the person blames themselves for not being calm. But no one can think their way out of overthinking. The mind cannot cure the mind. The loop is self-sustaining. Thoughts trigger emotions. Emotions trigger more thoughts. And the cycle repeats until the person feels trapped inside their own head. The real shift begins when the person stops fighting the thoughts and starts understanding them. When they realize the mind isn't malfunctioning, it's overfunctioning. It's doing too much, not too little. Eventually, the overthinker begins to notice patterns. They notice that the mind jumps to the worst-case scenario even when nothing is wrong. They notice that the body tightens before the thought even forms. They notice that certain voices, certain silences, certain situations always ignite the same storm. In this noticing, the person regains a small amount of control, not over the thoughts, but over the reaction. And this is where healing begins. One of the biggest challenges overthinkers face is emotional fatigue. It's not just the thinking that drains them. It's the constant vigilance. They are always preparing for disappointment, always rehearsing explanations, always imagining conversations that never happen. Over time, this constant mental activation wears down their emotional resilience. They become easily overwhelmed, not because they are weak, but because their system is overloaded. Decisions feel heavier. Social situations feel risky. Even small tasks feel like mountains. The world becomes louder, faster, more demanding than they can handle. And so they retreat into their thoughts, searching for safety that never arrives. But slowly, with awareness, their relationship with uncertainty starts to shift. They learn that uncertainty is not the enemy. Uncertainty is simply life unfolding. Every moment in history, every discovery, every friendship, every love story, none of it began with certainty. The human mind craves predictability. But the human heart grows through the unknown. And as the overthinker begins to trust life even a little, the storms start losing their strength. One day, the person notices something small, a moment when they didn't analyze a message for hours, a moment when they didn't spiral over a decision, a moment when they let something go without replaying it. These moments seem insignificant, but they are signs of deep change. The mind is learning new patterns. It is learning that not everything needs to be solved. Not every silence is a threat. Not every mistake is a failure. Some things simply are. The person begins to notice that life feels a little lighter. The world feels a little less dangerous. They laugh more naturally. They speak without rehearsing every line. They breathe more deeply. And for the first time in a long time, they feel something unfamiliar. Peace. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that shows up in small moments, in pauses, in breaths, in the feeling of being enough exactly as they are. This peace does not mean the thoughts disappear. They don't. The mind still imagines, still analyzes, still wanders. But now those thoughts pass by like clouds instead of storms. The person begins to see clearly that thoughts are not commands. They are suggestions. They are not threats. They are echoes. They are not identities. They are temporary visitors moving through the mind. And slowly, the overthinker becomes something else, an observer, not a prisoner. With time, the person realizes something even deeper. Healing is not about eliminating thoughts, but about expanding the space around them. When the mind is tight, even a small worry feels unbearable. But when the mind is spacious, thoughts come and go without shaking the entire world. The person begins to understand that thoughts are not reality. They are interpretations shaped by memories, fears, and expectations. And once this truth sinks in, the power of those thoughts begins to fade. They no longer define the person. They no longer dictate the future. They simply rise and fall like waves on the surface of the ocean, never touching the depth beneath. As emotional awareness grows, the body starts speaking more clearly. The person begins to sense when tension builds, when breath shortens, when stress rises long before panic hits. Instead of reacting automatically, they pause, they breathe, they give their nervous system permission to stand down. The body learns to trust safety again, even when the mind is unsure. The old survival patterns lose their grip. The fear that once controlled every decision begins to dissolve. What replaces it is gentle, steady strength. The most powerful change comes when the person finally understands that healing doesn't require being fearless. Healing simply requires moving forward, despite fear. Every step taken in uncertainty teaches the mind something new. Every moment of courage rewires old circuits. Every act of self-kindness replaces years of self-judgment. Bit by bit, the brain reshapes itself. The same way trauma wires the mind into fear, healing wires it back into freedom. Nothing is fixed, not even the patterns that feel permanent. Eventually, the person looks back and realizes they are no longer the same. They still think deeply, but the thinking is no longer a burden. It becomes insight, it becomes clarity, it becomes wisdom. The sensitivity that once felt like a curse becomes their greatest strength. They notice details others miss. They understand emotions with rare depth. They listen with sincerity. They care with intensity. They feel the world in high resolution. And instead of drowning in it, they learn to navigate with grace. Slowly, they stop apologizing for who they are. They stop shrinking to make others comfortable. They stop carrying the weight of every possible outcome. They start trusting that life doesn't need them to control everything. It only needs them to show up as themselves. And in this truth, they rediscover something they lost long ago, the simple joy of being alive. The final realization arrives quietly, without drama. Overthinking was never the enemy. It was a message, a signal from a younger version of themselves asking for safety, asking for stability, asking to be heard. And once that younger self feels understood, the mind no longer needs to scream. It softens, it rests, it lets go. The journey doesn't end in perfection, it ends in acceptance. Acceptance that the mind will always think, the heart will always feel, and life will always be uncertain. But none of that is something to fear, because the person has learned something far more valuable than control. They've learned trust. Trust in themselves. Trust in their resilience. Trust that whatever comes, they will face it with the strength they didn't know they had. And as the screen fades to black, one message remains clear. The mind that once overthought everything has finally learned how to live.